Professor, let me start with you because I read through the report, and these certainly sound like sensible recommendations. You say temporarily remove firearms from people who've been hospitalized for mental illness, who have domestic violence restraining orders. They're more prone to violence. Even people who have had 2 convictions in a row within the last 5 years for DUI. Those all sound sensible. But hearing what Olivia just mentioned with gun sales, do you have any hope that these recommendations will really turn into policy?
Well, I do. You know, I think people disagree about gun control. They don't disagree on the principle that certain people at risk of violent behavior, harming themselves or others, shouldn't have access to firearms. And our recommendations are building on a very well-established framework in federal law and on research evidence. And we're just trying to figure out how to make those laws work better so that they actually are more effective, and also that they're fair so that we certainly preserve the rights of lawful gun owners who aren't a threat to anybody.
Paul?
Yeah, let's bring you into this too, Paul, because I wonder, when we look at you know, this study, is this really new information here?
No, I don't think it's brand new. I don't think it's a brand new insight to say that people who've been violent in the past are more likely to be violent in the future. This study, I think, presents these findings in a very effective, systematic way, making relatively modest proposals.
Which means it's got no shot in hell in Washington?
Well, unfortunately, even though this study, in my opinion, takes the right approach in that it focuses on access to firearms rather than restrictions on particular types of firearms, which is too often how we go about this, despite that fact, this debate has gotten so ideologically charged that I think it would be the best expectation to imagine that the NRA would probably come up with some objection to this, and we'd end up with a fight rather than a sensible effort to tinker with the laws.
You know, some have said, look, Sandy Hook, you know, what happened there in the school shooting was going to be the game changer. If there was going to be any game changer on gun policy, it would be Sandy Hook. And look where we are now a year later.
Well, we have had some changes. It's important to note that in certain blue states, gun laws have been changed. For example, in Connecticut, in New York, in Delaware, Maryland, and Colorado. But this is a very big country, and we have different cultures all across the country. There isn't one American culture in general, and there isn't one American attitude toward firearms. And in regions of the country where firearm ownership is prevalent, it's as popular as ever.
Jeff, let me ask you, in terms of working on this report, when writing this report, were you thinking about trying to present it in a way that would not set off the sort of the alarm bells on the periphery of the gun debate?
I think we were. I mean, you know, it's a diverse group of people who come at this from different angles, you know, public health and the law and psychiatry and social science. You know, we're researchers, but we were really thinking about trying to approach this in a way that would bring scientific evidence to bear. And I don't think it should be that controversial, actually, if people consider it with an open mind. You know, I mean, I'm a scientist. I'm not a politician, but you know, I think that I think it should have a chance. We're not you know, promoting something that is that's radical. We just want to improve the current restrictions. I mean, for example, on the mental health side, there are lots of people who come in, are involuntarily hospitalized. There is clearly an elevated risk during the time around that time, and they're not currently prohibited because they may not actually have a civil commitment hearing. You know,
Professor, but if you look at the Sandy Hook case, and you look at the perpetrator, and I'm not sure if any of what you recommended would have prevented what he was going to do. He was very quietly and in his own room plotting this massacre.
Right. Well, you know, people are concerned, and rightly so, about mass shootings. You know, the mass multiple casualty shooting by a troubled young man. That is a tiny, tiny tip of the iceberg of the much larger problem of gun violence and firearms injury and mortality in this country that claims 31,000 lives and 74,000 non-fatal injuries. It's a very costly, probably costs our society over $100 billion a year. And I think we need to use the occasion when people are focusing on mass shootings. Unfortunately, you know, people who perpetrate mass shootings are atypical, both of people with mental illness, most
Yeah.
of whom are not
Right.
violent, and of people who perpetrate gun crimes. But this is the conversation we're having, and I think we should expand it to think about gun violence from a public health perspective. And half of that is suicides, by the way, and that is more related to mental health.
And Paul, and I wonder, in the way this debate has been framed, it's like a lot of debates in our culture right now, where things that become in the political arena are suddenly people take dramatic sides. I was at a party in Fort Lauderdale a few weeks ago. This guy had built a firing range in his loft apartment and was grilling me on how many guns he thought I should own, and how if I didn't have enough guns, the other guys have more than I do. And it was like this political battle this guy wanted to engage in. It wasn't a conversation about anything.
Yeah, well,
Seems typical.
guns have come to be, if not the most radioactive political symbol in our society, certainly up there with issues like abortion, gay
yep.
rights, and so forth. And that's simply the reality. So that even the I think, very modest and reasonable proposals that the professor is talking about will go into a political and ideological vortex where they'll tend to get jostled around, and unfortunately people tend not to look at them with
Let me turn to business, because we're a business show, and I think the business of the gun sales. How have the companies tried to deal with these tragedies? I know you have written about this in the past and how they've worked with the NRA to handle the PR around this, but surely Smith & Wesson has looked at this thing that could have really damaged their business and instead turned it into a lot of sales. What have they done?
Companies, and it's not just Smith & Wesson, I mean Sturm Ruger's financials have been just as strong. That's the largest publicly traded company. What they've done is they generally stay very quiet about the actual issues having to do with crime or mass shootings, and they emphasize home security. The big area of growth, the big marketing push is in keeping your home secure, and that's how they're selling these large capacity pistols. And they've even succeeded in persuading people that the military-style semi-automatic rifles are effective home defense tools, and
I would be so scared to have something like that in my home. But Professor, let me just go to you for a final thought, because what Paul was saying was that this is your research, like yours, will just go into one big void. How do you feel about that?
Well, that it would be discouraging if that happened. I mean, I'm not in this for the short run. It's a long-term project, and we need to do a lot of things. It's not just one thing. It's a complex problem, and it's a big problem. But I think we need to think about making improvements on the margins. And I'm hopeful that that something will happen. I hope I'm not wrong.